tinatawag sa labas dahil sa assignments mo. Hindi lang naman yung unang beses na bumagsak kayo sa assignments, di ba?
Talino ko sa math. God, this is my first time.
Alam niyo ba na pag di nyo napasa itong makeup class na to, maaari kayong bumagsak?
God! Oh my God! Hindi ko maaari.
Bawal malaman to ng magulang ko.
Wala kang magulang.
Ay, wala pala. Tita lang.
Paano yan, sir? Kasalanan mo to eh.
Sir, baka meron kayo pwedeng gawin.
Ano ba yun, sir? Charot lang ito. Sir, hindi naman kami pwede bumagsak, sir. May future ako sa basketball.
Bibigyan ko lang kayo ng simple makeup class, papasa niyo siya, then pwede ko na kayo sigurong ipasa niyo.
Kailangan natin yun. Para may ahon ng grade natin.
Parang may make-upan niya yung mga pangit na grade natin.
Panik ka. Kaya ako bumagsak.
Ngayon ko lang nalaman.
Tagal na, pre. Ano? Kaya tagal mo na dito sa grade 12.
Tara na.
Nakakabahan.
Ano ba ibig sabihin ng make-up test, pre?
Sa'yo. Nakabungabagsak. Hindi mo na makeup kasi.
Alam mo naman, bobo. Sa akin ka pa.
Guys, kumusta na? Ito nga pala yung balita, bumagsak kami. Pressure, alam niyo ba yun? Sobra!
Kailangan namin magpaturo.
Kailangan pa naman yung score no,
Pwede
bagsak
ba
kami.
nag-remedial ka na sa...
Dati lang yun.
Practical, bes!
Ay!
Oh, sugat na nga, wait lang kasi.
Hindi, wait lang. Huwag kang magturo. Bukas tayo.
Sige na! Ano kailangan nyo dito?
Siyempre, kailangan namin ng tulong. Yun yun.
Oh, ano?
Turo naman kami, sir. Paturo kami. Turo kami muna.
Sige, ano ba?
Alam mo ba yun?
Alam mo ba yun? Basic naman kasi.
Alam ba nakuha mo?
Uy, perfect.
Alam ko po. Paturo.
Alam niyo ba ang meaning ng hyperbola?
Siyempre, hindi.
Oh, paano ko ituturo sa inyo kung di nyo alam?
Nakakalitan dito eh.
Oh, yung talino mo ha. Sige, ganito, tuturo ko sa inyo. Hyperbola is followed by vertices and lateral recta.
Did you know that the hyperbola have different parts? The first one is boson.
Transverse axis and conjugate axis.
And the next one is the asymptote.
Naintindihan niyo na ba yung hyperbola?
Onti, pero kailangan namin example.
And the last part are the focal length, length of latus rectum, and eccentricity.
Sa wakas, masasagot na rin tayo. O mga talaga. Salamat guys.
Salamat, guys.
Good luck! Good luck sa makeup class!
Naalala niyo ba nung naglalaro kami ng table tennis? Kapag smooth and reflecting surface yung table, magiging isang example siya ng hyperbola.
Guys, yun yung makeup class at inuutos mo kayo ngayon na ilabas sa inyo yung notebook at mag-umpisa ng ating klase. So, to start...
Makeup class ko.
Kung ano ang sa resulta ng test ko dahil kahit kaunti naman may improvements at ibabalik ko lang sila sa inyo para ma-review niyo ba?
sa hyperbola, pre. Yung mga tulog. Hugulan pa nga yun.
Sige, papanood ako sa video. Maganda to, promise.
Pre, bakit ba yun?
Naiintindihan mo na yung math. Pag nakita mo itong kaibigan ko kalbo.
Sino? Si Jancy.
Oo, pre. Sikat to eh. Magaling sa math yan, pre. Kamukha ko yun eh.
So let's kind of just go through exactly a little bit of review of what we talked about, and then let's just go and see if we can find something else. So the first thing that we discussed was a parabola, formerly known as a parabola, right? And the definition of our parabola was that we had a point which we called the focus, and that was kind of like our introductory to this conduct section was this focus. Well, the definition of the parabola was for any point that was on this parabola, the distance between the foci and the directrix was equal, right? Yes?
Yeah.
Yes. All right. And it didn't matter, ladies and gentlemen, if we had a parabola that was opening down or if it was opening up. But any point on the line, the distance between the foci and the directrix was equal, right? So then we started talking, we said, all right, well, what happens then? What if there was maybe like kind of two of them together? And what we started bringing up to is ellipses. And we took a look at ellipses, and we formulated a definition of an ellipse. So if we kind of took two parabolas, I don't know why I'm making it like that. If we kind of took two parabolas and kind of forced them towards each other, then what we would have is we ended up having two foci, right? But now we don't have a directrix anymore, right? So the definition of the foci, if you guys remember, was for any point that is on the line, the sum of these two values is equal for any point on the line. So if I said this was A1 and this was A2, this was A3 and this was A4, then we knew that the sum of A1 plus A2 was equal to the sum of A3 plus A4, right?
Yes.
Remember that. And that was equal if it was a vertical ellipse as well. But we had to add them up, right? And that was when we kind of had two parabolas, if you thought of it like this, two parabolas kind of forcing or looking towards each other. Now, what do you think might be another option we might want to look at? What about if we had two parabolas, instead of adding, maybe what if we did what? Subtracting, right? Mathematics is very much about inverses. You learn how to do one thing, then you do the opposite. If you add two, and you subtract two. If we had two kind of parabolas with the foci facing towards each other, then we could also try it with them facing away from each other. Exactly. So what that comes up, ladies and gentlemen, is what we're going to introduce now is our state of hyperbolas. All right, so you guys are going to want to write these down in your notes of your hyperbolas. And we're going to go through a little bit of the definition of these, but I just want to go through kind of the formal definition first, and then I'll get a little bit more detailed of the characteristics of a hyperbola. So the main important thing I want you guys to understand about your hyperbola is, yes, they still have a center, like everything else, and yes, they have foci, just like everything else. And yes, each one of these little shapes also have a vertex, okay? Now, there is a little difference though. We don't have a major axis like we had in an ellipse. What we call this axis that the foci, the vertices, and the center all lie in is what we call the transverse axis. So we're going to give it a different name. It's called the transverse axis, okay? So the line that everything lies on is called the transverse axis. So we have a foci, remember, vertex, center, vertex, foci. And notice, ladies and gentlemen, the difference. Notice how the vertices are closer to the center than the foci. Right? You guys kind of notice that? It's a little bit of difference. And if you guys want to go through kind of the definition of an hyperbola, it's exactly like the ellipse, but in an opposite way. What we found out is if you were to take a point, okay, and let's call this B1 and this one B2, and then let's pick another point. I don't know. nonlinear here. B3 and here's B4. The definition is transverse axis. Transverse axis. What you'll look at here is, here we added them up when we said they're equal to each other, right? Yes?
Sure.
For a hyperbola, when we take B1 minus B2, that's now equal to B3 minus B4. All right, so I just want you guys to understand these definitions when you're looking at them, because now, instead of the addition of from 2 points to the foci to any point on an ellipse, now for any point on a hyperbola, when you subtract their distances to the two foci, that is going to be a constant, all right? Which every single point is going to be, the difference will be equal to, okay? So that's the definition of your hyperbola. Yes. That's not just sort of the format, it just kind of goes with the definition that for any point, it doesn't matter where the point is on the hyperbola, that you subtract their distances to the two foci and you're going to get a constant number. Yes?
In our homework, there was questions that were talking about D1 and D2. Is that the same thing as that?
Yes, but this was, for your homework, it would have been on ellipses, been adding them up. Yes. What questions were on?
I don't know, but I saw like in examples when I tried to look it up and they were talking about.
Kung pre yung may suggested video, ito yung sunod nating topic ah.
O ano?
Non-linear.
Tara, panoorin natin, pre.
Oh, ang ganda.
Hi, I'm Jimmy Chang. We're here to talk about how to distinguish between linear and nonlinear. Now, linear is actually one of those pretty straightforward functions out there, and you could say that there's linear and there's everything else, which is why they're called nonlinear. So let's talk about some characteristics between the two, and you'll see how to be able to distinguish between the two. Now, linear, let's start off with a graph. Linear functions is basically that of a line. It could be upward, downward, or horizontal. There's also vertical lines, but vertical lines are not considered functions, so I won't draw that. Now, nonlinear is basically a graph that's not that of a line. It can be a curve, it can be a split graph like that, or any graph that's not that of a line. Now, also, a linear function is that of degree 1, meaning x to the first only, okay? Nonlinear, not degree 1. When it comes to a polynomial, we're talking about x squared, x cubed, x to the 10th, etc. But also, nonlinear can be thought of as non-polynomials. For example, you may have square root of x. You could have x to the 1.6, or even negative exponents, just like so. So after a while, it's pretty straightforward to distinguish between linear and nonlinear, given the fact that linear has some very fixed properties and nonlinear can actually go all over the place. So I'm Jimmy Chang, and there are a few tips on how to distinguish between linear and nonlinear.
Pre, ang laking tulong ng kaibigan mong kalbo, pre. Salamat sa kanya.
Oh, ngayon alam mo na, patulog ka na.
Oo, pre.